Your spouse wants a divorce and you don't. You want this marriage to last. You want to somehow put it back together. Even if your spouse is involved with somebody else or has left you for whatever reason, you want to put the marriage back together, not just to be married, but to make it good again, better than it was before. We can help you do that. Hi, I'm Dr. Joe Beam with Marriage Helper. We work with thousands upon thousands of couples in the very same situation that your marriage is in right now. And thousands of individuals just like you, who is the one who wants the marriage to make it when the other person either has already left or definitely wants out, whether they're leaving because they want to be with somebody else or some other reason altogether. And so we have a lot of experience with this. This is part 2 in this series, and the first part, if you have not seen it, you might want to actually stop this video and go find that one and watch it first. In the part 1, I talk about the fact that you need to take control of yourself and talk about that a little bit. Now, if you do, it'll help you do parts 2 and 3. And if you cannot get control of yourself, if your emotions are just totally out of control and you can't find some way to become calmer, at least when you're interacting with this spouse, it's going to be much more difficult to do parts 2 and 3. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I am saying it's going to be more difficult. Now, you can find that video by subscribing just below, and many other videos we have about relationships, many of which have to do with marriages in trouble. And if you subscribe down below, not only will you be able to find all the ones we've done so far, but you also will be able to find the new ones as we bring them out. And we try to bring them out very regularly, dealing with specific issues. But now let's talk about this. Your spouse wants a divorce. You don't. You want to save the marriage, so what do you do? Okay. One of the first things we ask you to do is this. Assess what the real problem is. Now stay with me here. Stay with me because I might be going a different direction than you think I'm about to go. The first thing is, don't think it's all about you. Unless, of course, it is. I mean, if you have been a person that's been cruel and vicious and physically destroying or mentally or emotionally destroying the person that you live with, and he or she now wants out just because they can't take the fact that they're scared of you, that you're going to hit them, that you're going to do other damage to them physically, or you're going to do more damage to them emotionally or spiritually, those kinds of things, then yeah, you're a big part of the problem. But most people, even if they have done some of those things, are not all the problem. And you're not going to win in putting this marriage back together, even if you have contributed heavily to its downfall by beating yourself up. You see, if you're going to go around having a pity party, oh, woe is me, I should have done this, I should have done that, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. You can spend a lot of time having pity parties. An interesting thing about pity parties is you don't ask anybody to come because if they do, they may cheer you up. And so you wind up having it all by yourself. And it's all about, I'm terrible, I'm evil, I'm wicked, I'm sick, I'm sad, I'm dumb, whatever it might be. And even if you have done things that have been part of falling this marriage apart, beating yourself up and becoming, oh, I'm terrible, 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 is not going to help you put it back together. Now, you do need to accept responsibility for whatever you've done. You really do. But as you take responsibility for what you've done, be careful not to program your spouse against you. What I mean by that is if you go to him or her and say, I don't blame you for leaving me, I've been a terrible person, I don't know how anybody can live with me, what kind of ideas do you think you're putting into your spouse's head? You're reaffirming his or her choice to leave you by saying, yep, even you get it. Nobody can live with you. So if you're going to take responsibility for your behavior, which is mature and it's the appropriate thing to do, don't do it in such a way where you beat yourself up, say terrible, terrible things about you, because as you do, you're just going to turn your spouse against you even more. Or you're going to wind up giving ammunition that he or she may use against you if indeed they really want a divorce. And so if you say something like, you know, I'm terrible, I'm the meanest person it could ever be, I don't know how anybody could live with me, and your spouse is actually wanting out of the marriage, you realize that he or she may be quoting you exactly to his or her attorney. And his or her attorney can figure out how to use your statements against you to make you lose even more when it comes to the divorce. So be careful that you're not giving ammunition. And don't go back dredging up things from the past that he or she either, one, may not remember, or two, has never known about. But all of a sudden you think, well, the only way we can put this back together is for me to be absolutely gut level honest. And so I'm going to tell you every terrible thing I've ever done in our marriage, even the things that you don't know about. Thinking that somehow that openness, that transparency, that vulnerability is going to bring him back to you or her back to you is probably going to backfire on you. Because remember, we're talking about a spouse who already wants out of the marriage. And if you give them more reasons to leave the marriage, it's not going to be pulling them back to you. It's going to help push them further away from you. So you might be saying, well, Dr. Beam, then what do I do? I mean, you say take responsibility when appropriate. Yes, but do it maturely and do it succinctly. So what do you mean? If indeed you have been a controlling person, then you could acknowledge that. You know, I understand that some of the things I did led you to feel controlled. I'm sorry. Boom, that's it. That's enough. If he or she wants to talk about specific ones, listen. If they ask you things like, can you explain to me why you did that? If you have a good answer, give it, but I would be even careful about that. If it were I would say things such as, well, I can see how that led you to be controlled, and I understand you want to understand all of my motives that were involved in that. I don't know that I can explain them. I just know that what I did led you to feel that way. I'm sorry. Boom, still. So you acknowledge what you've done wrong, but you don't beat yourself up and you don't hand him or her ammunition. You say, well, why even acknowledge it at all? Because if indeed you're going to put this back together, there does have to be some degree of openness, transparency, and vulnerability. But what I'm suggesting strongly is that you don't go to such a degree that it winds up being used against you and actually facilitates the ending of your marriage. So if you have certain responsibilities, admit it. You say, well, what if it was something like adultery? What if my spouse says, but you cheated by sleeping with Charlie or Charlene? If you have done it and need to admit it, then you can say, yes, I did. If they start asking you about details, well, did you do this with Charlie or Charlene? Did you do that? How many times were you with that person, et cetera, et cetera? I strongly suggest that you look at him or her and say the following. Yes, I did that. You're right, it happened. I am so sorry. But at this point, I don't want to discuss the details. If at such a time you decide you want to try to put this marriage back together, then as we go through the steps we need to go to put the marriage back together, then I will answer those questions when it's the appropriate time to answer them and the appropriate way to answer them. I'm not trying to lie to you. I'm not trying to deceive you. I'm just saying right now in the situation that we're in, I admit what I did, but I do not want to go into any details at this point. Now, don't let them push you into it. Oh, that's exactly who you are. See, you've always lied. You're lying now, and you'll always will lie. I can never trust you again, because if you were honest, reply, I can understand how you feel. I really can. And I hate the fact that this appears that I'm being dishonest with you, but I'm not. I'm telling you the truth. I did do that. But I'm pretty convinced, based on the studies I've done, like, for example, watching this video, I'm pretty sure based on the studies that I've done that it will only do more damage than good right now. Now, if we can work through things and get to a place where we're actually trying to put the marriage back together, we will talk about the things we need to in the right context with the right help. But I can't do that right now. You're lying. No, I'm telling you the truth. And I understand your frustration that you're not getting all the information that you want. But I'm trying to do what's best here. I'm trying to be honest as best I can. I don't want to lie to you at all. But I want to make sure that when we actually talk about these things, we're in the right place with the right help so that it does good, so that it doesn't do more damage to you, doesn't do more damage to me, but hopefully we could learn how to get beyond it. Now, you can do what you want. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you how I would handle that. That's the way to take responsibility without beating yourself up. That's the way to take responsibility without giving the other person ammunition. He or she may get angry, but if it were I'd still hold my guns on that very calmly, referring you back to video number 1. Very calmly. because the more you have calm confidence when you're dealing with your spouse, even if inside you don't have any calm confidence at all, if you can be calmly confident in your interactions with him or her, in the long run, that's what's going to be the best effect. You understand? In the long run, it's what's going to be to the best effect. And so don't think short term, think long term. And so try not to fall apart. And, oh, by the way, if you become convinced that you're the only person to blame, that your spouse is some kind of a saint, that he or she is a marvelous, amazing person who's never, ever done anything wrong, and therefore everything is all your fault, and that's the kind of thing you're communicating to him or her, they're going to believe exactly the same thing, that it's all your fault. It may be mostly your fault. It may be hardly your fault. But only in the rarest of circumstances is it ever all one person's fault. And my guess is that's not true of you, no matter what you have done. Now, another thing not to focus on. The first one's not focus on beating yourself up. The second thing is don't focus on your spouse's flaws. You say, what? Okay. I'm sure that he or she's imperfect, and maybe a lot of the problems you have are tied into the way that he or she has treated you or the things that he or she has done. But understand that just as you are in all likelihood not all the problem, then your spouse in all likelihood is not all the problem either. And if you start trying to figure out his weaknesses and her flaws and those kinds of things and think, well, if I can focus on what's wrong with him, focus on what's wrong with her, then we can figure out how to save this marriage, in all likelihood, that's going to work against you in big ways. Oh, here's what I see on the internet all the time. I go into these groups about marriages and read what people write, and they want to diagnose their spouses, particularly the spouse who's trying to leave a marriage. There's one group, for example, that I go into regularly. It's actually one of our marriage helper groups, and I go in and read what people say. I typically don't write in it because of the fact we have admins that do such a wonderful job in there, and so I just let them do their work and don't get in their way. But I will go in occasionally and read some of the things that people write. And it's amazing how many people have diagnosed their spouse as being a narcissist. As a matter of fact, I was just speaking for a group over in the state of Arkansas where one of the questions was asked. We're having this class from a church where she was going, where the teacher is explaining how that some men are narcissists and talking about how do you deal with a narcissistic husband. And so I'm asking you, what are the signs of a true narcissist? To which I replied the same thing that our admins regularly and constantly say in our groups on Facebook and etc. There are very, very few narcissists. When you look at the true diagnosis, I mean the true diagnosis from the DSM-5, there are very few people who are true narcissists. Now, are there people who are selfish? Yeah. People who are arrogant? Yeah. People who do stupid things because of their selfishness, their arrogance? Yes. People that sometimes are hard to live with because of that? Yes. But it does not make them a narcissist. A narcissist is an actual diagnosis, and there are very few people, proportionally speaking, who are true narcissists. But then they start diagnosing all other kinds of things, like here's what's wrong with him, here's what's wrong with her, here's what's wrong with him, here's what's wrong with her. You say, well, why can't I do that? Because as soon as you put him or her into some pigeonhole, oh, he's a narcissist, or oh, she's bipolar, which, by the way, on average takes about 10 years to diagnose, even by a psychiatrist, because of the fact that people with it very seldom get to the psychiatrist, so the one who really can diagnose it, they go so long without going that that's part of that 10-year process. But here are people who meet these people for the first time or even have never met them at all. One lady said to me, my therapist said my husband is a narcissist. Oh, she diagnosed him. Yes. How many visits did she have before she made the diagnosis? Well, she's never met my husband. Not only is she unprofessional, she's unethical. Run. Because once you put somebody into a category, into a pigeonhole, narcissist, bipolar, whatever it might be, then you start treating that person based on that view. And it affects everything you think about that person. It affects everything you do in relationship to that person, or even the things you do about that person. And if that's what you're doing, my spouse is the problem and here's why, he or she's a narcissist, or my wife is some kind of a sex addict. Interestingly, it's amazing how many people get diagnosed as sex addicts, not by a professional, but by somebody who says, well, if he or she does that, then he or she must be a sex addict. I found a thing on the internet and I read that. Oh my goodness, that's exactly what's going on here. I actually know of a good man, a great man, a wonderful man, who on one occasion, while sitting in a shop where his car was being repaired, saw a Playboy magazine in a trash can. First and only time in his life he picked it up and looked at it. A woman walked in who was related to him, saw that magazine in his lap, saw him looking at it right there in that public place, and diagnosed that beloved relative of hers as a sex addict and treated him that way for the rest of his life. That's just wrong. And if you make those kinds of diagnoses, you're going to wind up making a whole lot of bad decisions when it comes to the other person. And so I strongly recommend don't focus on his or her flaws as this is the problem. And if we can fix him or we fix her, everything will be okay. Probably not going to work. As a matter of fact, in all likelihood, it's going to work against you. Or even vilifying your spouse to others. Like a guy just said to me the other day, well, my wife's having an affair, an emotional affair with another man. And her parents are backing her because they know we're having trouble. And, mom and dad backing their daughter. But I'm convinced if I go tell them she's emotionally involved with that man at work, then they won't be on her side anymore. They're going to be on my side. And so I need to go tell them that. And my response is, it's not going to work well. Because as soon as you go do that, here's what your wife's going to do when she hears that you went to her mom and dad and you told them she is having this, quote, emotional affair, end quote, with another man. She's going to see that as you throwing her under the bus. And rather than being compelled to come back to you, like, oh my goodness, let me go back to that really good man. It's going to be, how dare you hurt me in terms of relationship with my parents? I cannot believe you did that. You're evil, you're wicked. In other words, they're going to attack you. I know one man that we probably could have helped him save the marriage. Everything was going the right direction. But the final thing we couldn't get him past was this. My wife has told everybody I know about my affair. And I just can't go back into that world again. Because if I go to church with her, people are going to be looking at me like, there's the adulterer. If I go to parties with her, her friends are going to be looking at me like, he's the guy that cheated on her. And I just can't go back and face that judgment from everybody around me. And so I just can't go back. So if you're vilifying your spouse, if you're saying evil and wicked and terrible things about your spouse to other people, understand this. It's going to come back to you. At some point, some way, it's going to come back in a bad way. It's certainly not going to make the marriage better. Now, if you just want to hurt him or her as much as you can before you divorce them, then I guess vilifying and telling people things is what you might want to do to cause as much pain to that person as you possibly can. But if you really want to put the marriage back together, this is not going to help you. You say, well, but I need to talk to some people. There are occasions when sometimes you really need to. But we recommend go see a professional. Go see a counselor or therapist who's licensed so that when you tell them what you feel about your husband, about your wife, they can't tell other people. The word cannot spread. If they tell other people, you've got a lawsuit that you can file against them because they're not supposed to do that. You say, well, what if my husband's like, let's say you're religious. My husband is the worship leader at church and he's sleepy with one of the women at church. Doesn't my pastor need to know? Well, see, now we're talking about a different situation. And so let me tell you right here that rather than speaking generically to that, although in general I would say that in situations sometimes somebody else does need to know, not because you're trying to throw somebody under the bus, but because of the fact that sometimes they're just right things that need to be done. If you're in a situation like that and you can't decide what to do, you call that number on our screen here, and you talk to our client representatives who will tell you about the various resources we have. And one of those resources is our coach, our coaches. We have male coaches and female coaches. And they won't tell you what to do. That's not their job. But they will help you think through the pros and the cons. They've been very well trained toward that. So if you think you've got to tell somebody something, it may be worth your while to spend just a little bit of money to call our nonprofit and to line up some time with our coaches who can help you think that through before you make that decision. But generally speaking, just like diagnosing is going to work against you, vilifying is going to work against you as well. And so if you think, well, I'm going to fix my spouse and that'll bring him or her back. No. No, fixing is not going to work. And that's often the flaw of seeking counseling. That, okay, let's go to counseling so I can get the counselor to fix my husband or get the counselor to fix my wife. And if you walk in there with that, it's not going to be marriage counseling most of the time. As a matter of fact, if you go to traditional marriage counseling, by the way, the ones who are really, really good marriage counselors are awesome, are worth their weight in gold. But like every other profession, there are people who are awesome at it, people that are mediocre at it, and people that are just almost dangerous at it in terms of what they're going to do. And we hear stories all the time about people that went in to see a marriage counselor and it worked out against them. Now, we're not against marriage counseling. If you're going to do it, get the best one you can. But understand that often the flaw of seeing the counselor is, I'm here because I want him or her, the counselor, the therapist, to fix my spouse. Well, if you watched video number 1, you understand that you start with trying to control you. You do not start with trying to fix your spouse. Are there some things that may need to be dealt with later? Yes. Are there some behaviors on his part, her part, your part that might need to be rectified and changed later? Yes. But the first thing to focus on right now is not that, if indeed you're trying to put a marriage back together when your spouse wants a divorce. And don't even focus on the insurmountable problems. Like, oh my goodness, this terrible thing happened, that terrible thing happened. For example, and I'm going to give you a big one, but my husband has impregnated the other woman. There's a baby that's going to be in the picture. Oh my goodness, how are we going to deal with the fact that there's going to be another baby? And they begin to see that somehow as an insurmountable problem. Well, believe it or not, there are actually ways to deal with those things where that he could fulfill his responsibility to that child, but not still be emotionally or in any other way involved with that woman that's not healthy, but could also be married to you and put the marriage back together and make a good marriage. I know it sounds ridiculous. It's like, no, nobody can do that. It really can. We have seen people overcome just about everything you can possibly imagine. But if you focus on what appears to be insurmountable, like that's just too big, that's too major, nobody can get past that. Understand that when you focus on the negative, it makes you negative, and you'll lose the desire to salvage a marriage. And you, in all likelihood, will vilify your spouse. Rarely is a problem unsolvable. People can change. Now, I left my wife many years ago. I divorced her. I divorced her because I wanted to be with another woman and fully intended to make that relationship work. That one eventually fell apart. Well, I got involved with another woman, very much involved with her, because I was intent about not coming back to Alice. Now, understand that Alice is a really good person, but some of the things she did are in direct contradiction to what we're teaching you here. Not because she was a bad person, just because she didn't know what else to do. What I did was always much, much worse. Understand that in our story, Alice is the good one. I'm the one that did the bad stuff. But she wasn't perfect. And she tried some things that actually pushed me further away. And so I did not come back to Alice immediately when that thing fell apart with the other woman. I actually developed it with yet another woman after that. Not immediately. It took a period of time. And it was in that relationship when I decided I need to go back to my marriage. I can't explain all that here. It's too much. If you want to find our video about that, actually 2 videos I've done about that. Married, but in love with somebody else. And then Married, but in love with somebody else, part 2. If you want to hear more about that story. And they're right here on YouTube. Again, if you subscribe down here, you can get access to all those things. But when I finally asked Alice, now we've been divorced at 3 years at that point, but when I finally asked Alice, would you consider the possibility of taking me back? Every person she talked to her church leaders because she was very much part of her church. She talked to her family. They were all against it. Oh, by the way, all the church leaders were against it. She talked to her friends. Even her best friend said, if you go back to Joe, I'll never speak to you again. Which, by the way, was a promise that she kept. She's never spoken to Alice again after Alice decided to come back to me. But do you hear what I'm saying here? They were all saying he'll never change. Don't you know, not only the stuff he did that caused your marriage to end, his adultery, but all the things he's done since then, the lifestyle he's been living with liquor and drugs and women and all those kinds of things, he'll never change. People can't change. Once they do this, they're always going to be like this. And they told Alice that. She decided to risk it and take me back. Now, at the time I'm making this video, we're nearing our 32nd anniversary of our second marriage. People can change. Well, even if they were sex addicts, I wasn't, but Yeah, even if they're so-called sex addicts. Even if they, no matter what. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily a person will change, but I'm telling you that a person can change. And if you focus on the insurmountable problem, you're not going to believe that. Rarely is a problem unsolvable. And believe it or not, no matter what a person has done, it is possible to forgive. Really, no matter what, it is possible to forgive. It's possible to reconnect with each other. Well, here's another thing not to focus on. Don't focus on the other person if there is one. If your husband or wife is involved with somebody else and you think, well, if he or she just goes away, that other woman, that other man, if they just go away, then my life will be fine. It's probably not going to work that way. Oh yeah, that other person is definitely part of the problem. But just as you are not all the problem and your spouse isn't all the problem, then that person isn't either. And if that lover goes away, your spouse still may want out. Why? Well, I'll turn to that in just a minute. And if you try to do things to get rid of that other person, like trying to turn your spouse against his or her paramour, then more than likely, rather than turning him or her against that paramour, you're actually going to push them closer together. They become advocates for each other. And so if you're attacking that other woman, attacking that other man, your spouse is more likely to go to their defense and make the relationship stronger. You see, don't make yourself the enemy. The lover is not your competition. Really. You say, well, sure it is. That's why he or she wants to leave us for that lover. No, that person is not your competition. In a very true sense of the word, you are the competition. You're competing with you. Oh, I know, that sounds stupid, doesn't it? You're going, well, I was with you so far, Dr. Beam, but I think I'm going to have to leave you now because you're nuts. Stay with me just a minute as I try to explain that. One other thing not to focus on. You say, what's that? Don't focus. And this is going to sound like the craziest thing you've ever heard. Don't focus on trying to save the marriage. Wait, whoa, isn't that what this whole is about, that I'm trying to save the marriage? Yes, but if you focus on trying to save the marriage, if that's what you're focusing on, you're going to wind up doing probably the wrong things. You're going to get more anger. You're going to get more hurt. You're going to do more controlling, dominating, manipulating kind of things. You're going to make poorer decisions. But it's all about saving the marriage. No, I am all for saving the marriage. But if that's what you focus on, you're going to make poor decisions. Well, then what should I focus on? All right, let me give you a basic truth and then tell you what to focus on. Here's a basic truth of life. People don't leave what they have unless they believe what they're going to is better. Now, hear that well. People don't leave what they have unless they believe what they're going to is better. It may not be better, but for whatever reason, they believe it's going to be better. Don't think that if you try to argue them out of that, you're going to win. Like, I understand that you think that's better, but let me prove to you why it's not. Think about this, think about that, think about the other. For example, if you're religious, look at the Bible. You can't do that, that's a sin. Whatever it might be, you're not going to win. Because you're trying to use logic to overcome emotions, and when those two things come into combat with each other, it will be the emotions that will win. Now, I understand that the situation they're into, the thing they're headed toward, may be the worst thing for them ever. But as long as they think it's better than being with you, that's where they're going to keep going. And so what do you do here? What you focus on is trying to understand why he or she thinks that that's better. Do they think it's better just to be away from you? Because of your actions? Are you controlling? Are you dominating? One woman said, my husband made me into a sex object. I mean, at least once a day, sometimes twice a day, occasionally 3 times a day, I had to curtail all of my desires, all of my schedule, do everything just exactly like he wanted, to give him as much sex as he wanted, where I got to the point I dreaded him coming home because I think I'm just going to be used as an object again. And having sex that much, my body's not even able to cope with it, and I find it to be painful. I have no meaning. I have no value. I want away from him because of what he's doing to me. I would rather be alone than to be with that. Now, if you're therefore doing anything, if it's controlling, dominating, if it's acting like you're the parent and the other person's the child, if it's the fact that you lie habitually, is it the fact that you spend all the money and waste it away? My friend Dave Ramsey on his radio program will say financial reasons are the #1 reason for the divorce in America. And in terms of what people argue about, my friend Dave is correct. People argue about money more than anything else. But it's not the money that's leading them apart. It's the fact that I don't feel like you respect me. And so people will leave situations if they think just being by myself is better than being with you because of what you're doing. Now, if that's what's happening, if you understand, okay, then it may mean, as a matter of fact, if that's the case, in all likelihood it means, there's some changes you need to make. Like stop being controlling, stop being dominating. You might think, well, yeah, but I'm happy to, but I've lost my chance. He's already gone. She's already there. What do I do? Well, that's more than I can talk about in this video, but there are ways to do that as well. That's why I suggest you call for our client representatives at the number on the screen. They can direct you to our resources, many of which are free, some of which, even though we're a 501c3 nonprofit, we have to charge for. You can use the free resources. If you need more, you can use the ones that have some fees associated with them that are very reasonable. But there are ways, even when the other person has already left, that you can change, and hopefully that change will finally be seen by him or her. You see, here we're looking for the long run. Whatever it is that he or she thinks is better, whether it's because being away from you is better because of how you've been doing, or whether it's because there's another person out there and I think being with him or her is better because I like my relationship with that person better than I like my relationship with you right now. Or even it's like I have found a lifestyle that I cannot live if I'm a married person, and right now I'm enamored of that lifestyle. Those are actually different things, but all the same principle. And so rather than all those things I just suggested, don't focus on those because they'll pull you in the wrong directions. The thing to focus on is, okay, I'm going to try to understand why he or she thinks being away from me is better than being with me. Is it because of her? Is it because of that lifestyle? Is it because of what I've been doing? Whatever it might be. And then when you understand that, don't try to destroy the other person or relationship. Don't try to convince them by logic what they're doing is wrong. What you can do is start working on you so that finally, and it typically does not happen overnight, he or she begins to see you becoming a better and better person. And there's some very clear steps to go through to make that happen. And as that occurs, what we're hoping is with time, as you develop and grow and become the best you can be, he or she begins to realize, wait a minute, I need to be back over there. That this thing I've gone after, or this person I've gone after, this lifestyle I've gone after, or even the thing I tried to get away from, I'm looking back at you and thinking, but wait a minute. You see, that's exactly what happened with Alice and me. I was involved with another woman, very deep emotional connection with her. I came back for several reasons, but one of which was that Alice had developed and become such a better person that I realized being with her would be a good thing. It took me 3 years after a divorce to do that. Hopefully that will not be the case with you, because there weren't people there to help me, but we are definitely here to help you. So did you understand this video? I give you a lot of things not to focus on, because if you do, you're probably going to push the spouse away. And the one thing to start working on right now, which is trying to think, trying to understand. Now, don't go ask your buddies, hey, my husband left. What do you think he's leaving for? Hey, let me ask my family. My wife left. What do you think she's leaving for? Oh, and God forbid you put it on the internet. Hey, here's what my spouse is doing. Why do you think he or she is doing that? No, 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 no. You're going to get so many bad answers if you do that. You pay attention. You listen. When and if you have conversations, you pay attention. You think back on the conversations you've had before. You are taking control of you. That's video 1. And now you're beginning to figure out what it is I really need to work on. Do you understand? Well, we have another video to talk about, and a whole lot of other things beyond that that you can get on our other videos here, and resources that you can call that number and get to right now that our client representatives will help you have. If you call after business hours, leave a message, they'll call you back. And be sure to check out the 3rd video in this series.